Good evening and welcome to the Clergy Cafe for another exciting instalment tonight. I'm going to warn you now, there's a few gremlins in the system before we begin. I have remembered to turn on my mic, unlike every other week, but we are experiencing a few sound and visual issues, so please bear with us. We may go blank at some point, but we will fix it and we will return to you. Tonight, it's good to have you with us. Tonight we've got Father Tom Connor with us in the Clergy Cafe. So remember, check us out on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Follow us, like us and share. So, to introduce Father Tom. Father Tom is actually a Yorkshireman. He says that himself. He's originally from Yorkshire and is the eldest of 6 in his family. Father Tom's brother is also a priest, however not in the Diocese of Shrewsbury. He's in the Diocese of Middlesbrough. No comment there. From his school days, Father Tom always wanted to be a commercial lawyer. And so he went to University of Sheffield and studied law. On gaining his degree, Father Tom was recruited to one of the big law firms in London. He worked as a lawyer for 8 years and did all sorts of different work. Public inquiries, high court trials and commercial mediations. This work took Father Tom all over the world, but was mainly based in London and then in Manchester. The then lawyer discovered that he had one plan and God clearly had a different plan. This came ever more clearer for Father Tom in one of his parishes in London as a parishioner, and also in his second parish in Sale. The sense of community and the work he was doing, particularly with young people, and in the parish preparing them for the sacraments. Father Tom was then accepted to start his training by the then Bishop Brian. He went to study in Spain and then on to Rome. However, he was asked to do a little bit of extra study in canon law and so ended up being away for 8 years studying. On his return to the UK, Father Tom was ordained in 2016 and has served as assistant priest on the Wirral and in the cathedral. Father Tom is currently parish administrator of 2 churches in Eastern Shropshire. However, Father Tom also has many other roles. Also, the Chancellor of the diocese, and he's also Bishop Mark's judicial vicar. We'll hear a little bit more about that as we go. Father Tom says he loves to cook and to travel. He enjoys hill walking, literature and the cinema, and is a big sports fan, which we'll also hear more about. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I know any of these jobs that Father Tom's got. I've no idea what it means to be the Diocesan Chancellor, and I also have no idea what it means to be Bishop Mark's judicial vicar. But I'm sure we're about to find out. So I'm going to invite Father Tom Connor in. Good evening, Father Tom. How are you? I'm well, thank you. We do have a little bit of feedback and we have gone slow, but I'm sure we will keep tracking on.
Let me turn you down a little bit of this, see if that helps. There we go. Is that any better?
So, as promised, we are having a few technical difficulties. The speed here isn't the best. The broadband seems to be struggling, but we do have Father Tom here with us. Father Tom, you can just hear us, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I can hear you. You're hearing me?
I think we're going to get there. I think we're going to keep trying, and we'll see what happens. I'm right in thinking you're in the Cathedral House just now, aren't you?
Yeah, we next door to Cathedral House, really. But yeah, here in Shrewsbury, just down the road from the cathedral. Yeah.
So, your story's quite an interesting one, and thanks for sharing it with us tonight. How did you come that your brother is in the Middlesbrough diocese and you ended up in the Shrewsbury diocese?
Yeah, I think you said I'm a Yorkshireman, and you're right. I do say that myself, so that's where I grew up. I grew up in the Middlesbrough diocese. It's where my brother grew up, and because I guess the call to priesthood came a lot later, in my life. I was established elsewhere by the time I sort of came to grips with that. So I just applied to my local diocese, and Phil, my brother, who's a really good man, a good priest, He applied to his local diocese as he grew up as well.
Hmm.
So yeah, he's up in Middlesbrough. He works for the bishop. He does a lot of youth work up there. He's been involved in their recent virtual pilgrimage to Lourdes, which has been an interesting experience, I think, for him. Yeah, he's a good guy. We're all very proud of him.
So before you were, obviously before you entered the priesthood, you were a lawyer. I mean, that's
Yeah.
quite a different career. Tell us a bit about what it was like before you entered the priesthood.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Father Nick said something brilliant last week. He said there's a difference between, trying to live out a vocation, live out a priestly vocation, I guess. That's not a job. It's more, Father Nick said, like a marriage. It's more like a relationship. So, I mean, you're right. It's a very different way of life. It's a very different thing. That said, you're there to share something with people. It's about relationships, and it's about interacting with people, and bringing those things together. So in that sense, I guess there are similarities.
And so, as a lawyer, what type of cases did you handle?
Yeah, I was a solicitor rather than a barrister, but I only ever did sort of commercial work. In fact, when I graduated, at the graduation ceremony, the vice chancellor of the university led the sort of ceremony. And there were a few of us when we came up to receive our degrees that he spoke to whilst he was giving us our degree certificate. And with me, he said, what are you going to do next? I'm there. It's just a conversation between the two of us, but I'm there on the dais, in front of, it felt like thousands of people gathered for this graduation ceremony. And I said to him, well, I'm actually going to join one of the commercial firms in London. And he sort of looked down his nose at me. He said, with great disappointment, he said, oh, you're going where the money is. And it was true. That was right. That was what I was doing. Commercial law, well, more specifically, corporate law was what I'd been good at, or felt I'd been good at university. I got the opportunity to join, as he said in the intro, a really big, impressive law firm in London, and it was just a great opportunity, a great thing to do. And at the time, it was absolutely what I wanted. It was what I was looking for, what I'd trained for, what I'd studied for. So yeah, different to how things are now.
So, you obviously worked for a bit of time in the High Courts. I mean, that must have been quite an intense part of the work. What was that experience like? And I suppose the question that I've got to ask is, did you actually have a wig as well?
No, so it's the barristers who would wear the wigs, although actually increasingly they don't. Yeah, it was all very intense. I mean, in a good way, mostly. It wasn't so much a matter of being in court every day. As a solicitor, most of the work that you do would be preparing for hearings, helping clients to prepare for hearings. So there was a lot of that. But you're right; it's really hard work. You spend a lot of hours, a lot of time working on it. You have to be pretty committed to it. So yeah, that was very much my experience.
So you also said that your career took you to many different places. What types of places did you visit?
Yeah, the firm I joined, I was based in London, and at the time, I mean, this is a while ago, but at the time they had 3,000 lawyers just in London. But the firm I joined had 32 offices worldwide at that stage. So it was a real international outlook, and you were always dealing with, a bank from one country, a company from another country, a purchaser from another country. It was often, very much like that. For me, I did a few days of sort of, well, it felt like working 24-hour days, but over several days in Brussels. I went over to Texas to take witness interviews. There was a real breadth to it. In a sense, it felt very glamorous, but actually, day to day, it was hard work. These guys work hard.
So, was there any particular cases that you actually would say would stick in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think most lawyers or ex-lawyers in my case would say, the ones that stick in your mind, sadly, are the ones that didn't go so well. The ones maybe that you lost, or whether there was a real difficulty. And sadly, of course, those are the ones that you remember. We had some, pretty high-profile cases. I mean, you mentioned a big public inquiry that I was working on. One of our cases went all the way to the Supreme Court. Actually, ended up, interestingly, it was heard in the same ticket in the Supreme Court with the case that Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones brought against Hello Magazine.
All right.
Our case wasn't nearly as glamorous as that, but it had a similar point in law that had to be decided. So yeah, I mean, there's been some fairly big stuff.
So life as a lawyer must be pretty different to life now.
Yeah. I mean, it absolutely is. But I go back to that point I made earlier about the great point Father Nick made. As a priest, you're trying to live a relationship with God. You're trying to live a relationship with God and with the people that you're asked to minister to. And that's what's primary. I mean, there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of important tasks, but at the center of it is that relationship. That's what you're aiming for. So you're right. I mean, it is different, but that's why it's different. That's why it's.
So I suppose the question I've got to ask as well: did you drive a posh car as a lawyer?
Not at all. No, I mean, particularly in London as a young lawyer, it's expensive down there. If you've not got connections and a base down there already, it's an expensive place to live. And certainly, even though I had a good job when I first moved down there, I couldn't afford a car. And actually, there's a funny story, because as the sense of being called to put myself forward for the priesthood grew in me, it came at a time when I was getting a promotion at work. And I thought they were making me an associate, which is kind of a step below partner. And they were sort of starting to talk about, becoming a partner and that sort of thing. And I was driving an old Fiesta at the time. I'm still driving an old Fiesta now, but it's a different old Fiesta. And there was a point where I thought to myself, you're an associate now. Shouldn't you get a fancy car, something to match your newfound status? And in that growing sense of God calling me to something else, that was actually a really interesting question for me to consider. Well, why do you want that? Why is that important? Is it important? So funnily enough, the posh car ideal was an important question in its own little way on the journey to the life I'm living today.
Well, I suppose you've already answered the question that's coming at the end. What car do you drive? Because you're in a posh Fiesta nowadays.
I've spoilt the.
You've stolen the last question. So, what for you was the turning point for your vocation, and in many ways the turning point for your life?
Yeah, I mean, it came over time, is the truth. This wasn't a sort of road to Damascus kind of a moment. It came over time. But there were several moments along the way. The time it first came to me, I grew up, as we've said, in a parish in Middlesbrough diocese, and when I was a boy, that was an absolutely thriving parish, and I remember particularly, for the Easter Vigil or the Vigil Mass of Christmas, you had to get there early. It was packed, the church, standing room only at the back, and ranks of people standing at the back. And I went away to university and then got this job, but I'd always come home to my parents for Christmas and for Easter, and go to Mass at the same church that I'd grown up in. And I can't remember whether it was a Christmas Mass or an Easter Mass, but it was after one of those. It We went to the midnight Mass or the Vigil Mass, and the numbers of people there. There'd been a new parish priest in the meantime, and he was a good man, but an elderly man. It had been hard for him to move parishes at that time in his life, and things had just sort of slowed up, and people had voted with their feet, and the church was, 2/3 full. A church that for those masses I'd always remembered as being packed, standing room only, and it really brought something home to me. So the next week, back at my own parish in London, and if we went to the church, I could show you the bench that I was kneeling in at the time and the spot in the church. I prayed, for the priest and for the parish. And much to my surprise, I mean, shock, I got an answer back. You can do something about this. Put yourself forward. And I really didn't want to. I mean, I really didn't want to. I had other plans. I had, the start of a career. I had, I was expecting my life to go in a different direction. So if there's a moment, that's probably it. But it took a long time, maybe 6 years after that, little by little, of God sort of drawing me forward and freeing me of a few things, actually, freeing me of a few of my own expectations, and giving me a little taste of reality, I guess, but also always of his love, drawing me forward.
And I think that's where the whole thing of God's got one plan whilst we've got another plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can be decisive about things if we're really trying to live a life of faith. If we're trying to pray, we're making use of the offer of the sacraments. If we're living that Christian life fully, then I think it should give us confidence that we can make good decisions. Or even if we make poorer decisions, God will be there with us, supporting us, and things that may be even beyond our own capacity, they'll be able to be worked out. So I don't think we necessarily need to worry all the time. Is this exactly what God's looking for? Better, let's live in that relationship, and in that, we'll find our treasure. We'll find what's important and good. So a life like that can give us confidence.
So tell us a bit about that journey from lawyer to priest. What happened there?
Yeah, it was funny. I mean, in this year of faith, year of the word, it's really interesting because one of the things that really grew in me was a much deeper appreciation of the Mass, but particularly within that, the liturgy of the word was so important. That what had been for me maybe when I was a child, a teenager, was just a moment in the Mass where you sat down and somebody read a reading. As this sense of what God was calling me to grew in me, and as my relationship, I guess, with God grew, the readings in the Mass became really powerful for me. They weren't just about something that happened a long time ago or something that happened to other people, but very often, I mean, maybe every Sunday almost, they came to mean to me what I should be doing, what I should be, what God was putting to me, offering to me, and that was huge for me. Noticing that, I had a lot of support, from priests actually, but particularly a monastic community who let me visit them maybe for a long weekend every 3 months or so, and they gave me a lot of support and a lot of good advice, and in a sense a great example of prayer as well. But there were then these funny moments as well, where people quite innocently said things that had a bigger significance than I think they realised. The managing partner at work, when after they'd made me an associate, we were talking about that earlier. He took me out for lunch for a kind of yearly appraisal, and we chatted about how the year had gone, and he was really kind, really positive. Tom, the year's gone really well, and we hope that it won't be too long before we're talking to you about partnership. And then he paused. Now, Richard, practicing Anglican, a good man with a sense of faith. And he paused and he said to me, the only thing with you, Tom, is that, well, I just worry sometimes that you're going to disappear off to Rome and never come back. Now, I'd never talked to him. I'd barely talked to anybody about this sense that was growing within me of God calling me to this. It was my deepest secret. And it was the most remarkable thing that he would raise that. There was an equally funny occasion as I was leaving that firm. The partner who managed the department that I worked in, Charlie, a Catholic, again, a really good man. First thing, I went to see him at his desk and I said, look, can we have a chat? I've got something to tell you. So we went and booked out one of the boardrooms, and we sat there in the boardroom, and I told him, about the decision I'd made, and that I was leaving because, I was applying to seminary, and the bishop wanted to send me to study. And Charlie listened to me, let me speak, let me explain. He was really sympathetic, really supportive. And at the end of the conversation, he said, "Okay," he said, "I'll break the news to the partners, and we'll work out, when you can leave, and how we announce it to the firm and to clients and that sort of thing." He said, "Look, before we go though, I'd better ask, because the partners will ask me to. They'll expect that I've asked you. Would it help if we offered you more money?" It was delightful, but it was a sign of how things had changed. I guess if you go from the conversation I had with the vice chancellor at the graduation, oh, you're going where the money is, to Charlie saying to me, "Would it help if we offered you more money?" I mean, it's quite a journey.
And so you're now currently parish administrator. So a couple of questions with that one. First of all, what does that involve? And why are you not called a parish priest?
Yeah, I mean, the answer to both questions is exactly the same. A parish administrator has all the responsibilities of the parish priest, but he's not resident in the parish in the same way. So I mean, as you know, I'm talking now from Shrewsbury. I'm in the house next door to the cathedral. So the two churches, the parish that I look after, are about 20 miles down the road, down the M54. So because of the different things that I'm doing in the diocese at the moment, I spend a lot of time sort of traveling from one to the other. So I'm in the parish Wednesday evenings, Thursdays, and then Sundays. And I spend most of a Saturday usually, when we're not in lockdown, when we're not under pandemic restrictions. I spend a Saturday working on parish stuff. So that's that's the reason.
So you travel quite a bit then for the jobs that you do within the diocese? Yeah,
or at least I certainly was before we all got asked to stay home and stay safe. I mean, a typical week I'm doing about 300 miles a week. So I celebrate on a Monday morning. I celebrate Mass here for the nuns here at the convent, and then I go up to the curial offices. Then Father Chris Matthews, God bless him, puts me up for a couple of nights in Birkenhead whilst I'm doing work at the tribunal and at the chancery. And then on a Wednesday afternoon, I get back in the car and drive the way down to Shifnal, and we have a exposition, and there are confessions heard, and a parish mass on a Wednesday evening. That's a really great thing. And then Thursdays in the other church in Albrighton, and then Sundays we celebrate a mass in each of the churches too.
So what does the diocesan chancellor do? What's that job all about?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, actually, it probably isn't very interesting. But what's funny about it is that canon law asks the Chancellor to be basically the one who keeps track of the paperwork. Bishops, bless them, get lots of letters into them, lots of requests. The bishop is the sort of figure of our communion within the diocese and within the church. He's our pastor, and he celebrates the sacraments. He gives priests like me faculties to celebrate the sacraments on his behalf. He governs the diocese. So there's a lot that we ask of our bishops, and a chancellor really is there within the diocese to support that, to try and keep track of things. But traditionally, the sort of habit has been for that to become a role for a canon lawyer, somebody who can advise the bishop on things, on canonical matters. One of the bishop's advisors within the diocese. So that's really what I do. An analogy for anybody who would sort of follow this is the chancellor is like the in-house lawyer for the diocese, but for canonical matters rather than being a civil lawyer.
So you've also got another role, and that's Bishop Mark's judicial vicar. Now that one sounds really, really important. What on earth does it mean?
Yeah, it's. I should say, I don't think anybody thinks it's ideal that I've got these two roles. I've taken them over in both cases from good men who had to retire suddenly from the roles. So it's a bit of a surprise to me, to everybody, and it probably wasn't what anybody planned. But you're right. So a vicar, we're used to a vicar being a sort of Anglican word for a priest. Typically, we think of the vicar of Dibley. But a vicar is somebody who acts on behalf of somebody else. So we use the word. It's a very legal word. Actually, we use the word vicarious to mean the power that somebody exercises on somebody else's behalf. So the bishop, I mentioned the bishop governs the diocese, and one of the things about governing the diocese is he has judicial powers for certain matters within the diocese. Typically, that's to do with marriage annulments. That's the majority of the things that the tribunal deals with, but not exclusively that. And a judicial vicar exercises that power of the bishop in his name and on his behalf. So it's not as complicated as it sounds, really. But you're right. It's a big responsibility, really. It's a big thing. It's an important thing.
And I suppose in many ways your background in law supports you and helps you in this.
Yeah, I think generically, you kind of know the ropes. I spend a lot of time sitting with people, listening to their story, letting them, tell me about the case they'd like to bring or the experiences they've had. They're sort of giving me evidence, really. And I need to consider with the other judges, because we have several other judges in the diocese, how the case works, how it hangs together. We've got a really good administrator in the tribunal. Like so many people, she's furloughed at the moment. So there's a kind of management aspect to it as well. So it's quite involved, and a bit of experience in working in civil law has been really useful, actually, I think.
And did you think you'd ever see yourself 4 years after ordination doing all these jobs?
No, good grief, no. No. Like I go back to the story about the vice chancellor. If you'd told a 21-year-old me, or whatever it was at the time, being a priest would have been an amazing thing for that 21-year-old. He'd have been stunned. But that he'd now be doing canon law and dealing with the sort of marriage cases that weren't on his radar at all previous to that. It would have been an enormous surprise.
So we're going to take a different route now. Normally we leave this question to the end, but I think from our conversations anyway, there's quite a bit of conversation here. And you've had quite a bit of contact with multiple popes. That's right, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, two. Yeah. So, yeah. That's true.
So you were in St. Peter's Square for the election of Pope Francis. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was an amazing time. You might remember that the last conclave, the conclave itself didn't meet for very long. You know, the conclave is the meeting between the voting cardinals, where they pray together and they discuss together who the next pope might be. So the last conclave that elected Pope Francis, the conclave itself didn't take that long. But there was a build-up before the conclave actually happened between Pope Benedict's announcement of his resignation and the conclave that elected Pope Francis actually starting. And Rome was full of expectation in that time. I mean, the world's press had gathered, and it took a while for the cardinals to come together. So, although the conclave hadn't been meeting for that many days, there was, it had been quite a while coming. It had been weeks before we got to that point. So all this expectation, the journalists all sort of looking for something to report on and a new angle. And in the midst of all of that, our English cardinal at the time was Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor, bless him. He died a couple of years ago. And he was still our cardinal, but he was over the voting age. So cardinals don't vote in the conclave after a certain time. So he wasn't going into the conclave itself. But he was out in Rome and was holding a lot of meetings with others before the conclave actually gathered. And he asked our rector whether we could join together with him to celebrate a mass at his titular church. So when a cardinal, when a bishop becomes a cardinal, he's given a titular church. And Cardinal Cormac's, there's a beautiful church in Rome that some people will know called Santa Maria sopra Minerva, right by the Pantheon. It's a very lovely church. It's where St. Catherine of Siena's remains are entombed. A really very beautiful church. And so the cardinal asked that the English college guys gather there to celebrate a mass with him. And I was the college MC at the time, so I had to organise all that. And the guys in the college were really quite worried about it, because when a conclave is meeting, there'll be a vote at certain times during the day, and each time they'll burn the voting papers, and that's where the white smoke comes from. Because when there's an election, it's white smoke that's released rather than sort of sooty grey or black smoke from burning the papers. And we knew that this mass that the cardinal wanted us to join with him to celebrate would clash with one of the votes. So the other guys in the college, we were all, sort of eager to, really to be available, to be in the square should it happen. So Santa Maria sopra Minerva is probably a good 45-minute walk, I guess, from St. Peter's Square. And we celebrated that mass, and we prayed the mass and with the cardinal there. And we were doing that as the conclave was meeting. And we left the church, and night had fallen, or the evening had fallen. And anybody who knows Rome, it had rained during the day. And anybody who knows Rome, those cobbles, the San Pietrini, they call them, the little peters, the little rocks, were shining in the rain under the street lights. And we were about halfway back to the college, which was in the right direction to go towards St. Peter's Square. And one church started ringing its bells. And we all looked at each other. And then another church started ringing its bells. and it spread throughout the city. You could hear it, and the atmosphere in the place. I mean, it was atmospheric anyway because it was a beautiful evening, with the rainwater shining on the cobbles under the street lamps. The atmosphere sort of grew, and the 4 or 5 guys I was with, we ran all the way to get into the square, and we ended up about 50 people from the front. And it was an amazing experience. You know, the city went nuts as people gathered from all over the place and from all nations. All, you know, I guess, well, I wouldn't want to guess, but there were hundreds of thousands, I would think, of people gathered in the square and all the way down the Via Conciliazione. It was the sort of crowd, or the size of crowd that you'd expect at a rock concert, or, you know, Glastonbury or something like that. It was huge, but it had come in prayer and expectancy. It was amazing to be a part of it.
I'm just showing now the picture of the crowd. I mean, that is phenomenal, the size of that crowd. But also,
and it went all the way back to the river. I mean, what you can see in the distance there is the Via Conciliazione, where the two lamps, street lights are on towards the left-hand side of the picture. You know, that went all the way back down to the river. Just thousands and thousands of people. And when Pope Francis came out and was announced, he I mean, you might remember it. Many people will. You know, he started by saying good evening, which wasn't, you know, the sort of thing that a newly elected pope would often say. And then he did this amazing thing. He said, I'm supposed to give you a blessing now, but before I bless you, I would ask you to pray for me. So let's pray together now. And this amazing spirit of prayer spread over that huge, like I say, sort of rock concert crowd. Everybody turned in prayer for the Holy Father. And there was a really profound silence. And somebody started a round of applause. And I wish they hadn't. You know what I mean? Because it was a powerful moment of prayer. And I just, I wish they hadn't. I wish we'd hung on to that prayer for a little longer.
Yeah, it's a really, really powerful moment. And I'm just going to show the picture now. If you stood there with a very well placed balcony between you and somebody else on that square, and that's a night you will never forget.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the guys who were with me for that, it was funny. You know, I'm not particularly a Vatican watcher, but I think even those who are weren't particularly familiar with who George Bergoglio was. And it was difficult, you know, with that many people there as well, it was difficult to hear the announcement of who the new Pope was. And we would have probably missed understanding it properly had there not been, and you can actually see them in the previous shot that you showed. There was a group of young South American women who were standing next to us in the crowd. And when they heard George Bergoglio, they went absolutely nuts. So they were telling us all about it as we were standing there in the square. It was funny when I think the next day actually, Father Chris Matthews, who we'll hear from later, who was here at the cathedral as one of the clergy here at the time. He got in touch with me and said, "Look, Radio Shropshire, BBC Radio Shropshire, would like to do an interview with you about the experience of being in the square." And I was telling the guys at the college this, so I did this radio interview from my phone that afternoon. And one of the guys rather unfairly said, "Oh, was that after the tractor report?" which was really unfair. I mean, now that I've lived in Shropshire for a while, there are a lot of tractors on the roads, but it doesn't define the place.
So that night, you've then gone on to have more encounters both with Pope Benedict and Pope Francis.
Yeah, I mean, the encounters with Pope Benedict came before that. You're right, but yes.
So one of the things that, again, you said to me was that you served for both Pope Benedict and Pope Francis. How did you get the chance to do this?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's an enormous privilege. To be honest, it's not as surprising maybe as it sounds. Typically, when there's a papal mass, at St. Peter's or in the square, the MCs, the masters of ceremonies for the Pope, will organise for seminarians from one of the colleges in Rome to come and act as the altar servers. So it came through the college, and it's to be honest, it's a pretty typical experience that a seminarian or a religious studying in Rome would have. If you were there for a good few years, as I was, you would usually have at some stage that opportunity. But it's an amazing privilege. But what's great about it is that you get to share it with other people. It's a great thing to talk to people in the parish about. There's that 6 degrees of separation thing. If you've shaken hands with somebody who's shaken hands with, you do that 6 times, and they reckon that you could join up everybody on the planet, pretty much. Well, once you've shaken hands with the Pope, you're a link in the chain within our communion in the church, and it's a great thing to be able to tell people about and to share with them, in the parish. So, I mean, it was an amazing thing to do. It was a great privilege. You've got the photos and whatever, but what's really great about it is that you get to share it with people, back here in the diocese and in our parishes.
I mean, one of the things I always remember being an altar server as a child, particularly, was always that conversation before Mass with a priest. That sort of like, just, we're all in this together, that little pep talk, really. Does that happen with the Pope?
Well, that's the point at which you get to meet him and to shake his hand. So typically at St. Peter's, for those who know St. Peter's, when you walk in to the basilica at the nave end, over on your right-hand side is the Chapel of the Pietà, that very, very famous statue of Our Lady holding our Lord's body after he's been taken down from the cross. And in fact, if you look carefully, not holding him, the corpus, the body of our Lord, kind of sits above her hands as she's sort of cradling his figure. And that's where the servers and the deacons and the MCs gather in that little chapel before the Mass starts. And so the Holy Father is brought in and introduced to everybody. And you would shake his hand at that point. And he might say a couple of different words to you. He might ask you where you're from, or maybe what you're studying, or something like that. But typically, the MCs will prepare you and say, kind of beforehand, well, look, he's particularly busy. Please don't add to what he's got on his plate. And you do have a sense of a man who has, not a moment to himself. When I was book bearer, so when I was serving for Pope Francis, and they asked me to be the missal bearer for the Mass. One of the jobs that you do as book bearer is that you'll go into the little anteroom beside the Chapel of the Pietà, and you'll hold the book with the vesting prayers that a priest would say before Mass for the Holy Father. And when I did that, he'd just come from the Paul VI Hall. There was a big conference there that morning, and he came straight from that, straight into the Chapel of the Pietà. He was introduced to everybody who was serving and deaconing the Mass, and then with the 2 MCs, I went with them and the Pope into this little anteroom beside it, and they give you this book, and you kind of hold it, like that, so it's here, and the Pope can see it. And the 2 MCs, took off him what he didn't need and put on his alb and put on his, his cincture and the chasuble, and you just had a real sense of a man who had nothing for himself, he was giving it all. And I was fascinated by this, and I'm holding this big book, and I'm looking over the top of it, looking sort of over the edge of it. And I was thinking, here I am in this room with, just the Pope and just 2 other people. And then it occurred to me, hang on, the Pope's getting vested for Mass. Stop staring at it. It's not fair. Poor man, So yeah, amazing experiences to share with people.
And before I showed a picture of you with the book, with Pope Francis. That was that was pretty close to Pope Francis. However, I'm just going to show the picture of you actually at the sign of peace during Mass. And I think in this one you're a deacon, aren't you?
This would have been a couple of years later, when I deaconed the Mass, the papal Mass. And yeah, you're right. It's a beautiful photograph, and I'm very glad to have had that experience to exchange the sign of peace with the successor to St. Peter is really an amazing thing. It's funny, as you say, in both those roles, I've been pretty close to Pope Francis when he's celebrating the Mass. And one of the things that's really interesting is that after communion, Pope Francis returns to the chair, the presider's chair, and there's a deep sense of prayer. He kind of, he almost collapses into the chair. He sort of sits there almost a bit folded up, almost a bit hunched, deeply in prayer, and that made a deep impression on me when I've served Mass and deaconed for him.
Again, moments that you'll never forget. The powerful view of that picture is incredible. It really is. So you mentioned before that you did an interview for BBC Radio Shropshire. You've actually taken it further than that, haven't you? You've gone to the dizzying heights of BBC quite a bit. You've been on the BBC, and we're going to show a bit of a clip in it in a minute. But what was that for? What did you film for the BBC?
Yeah, so, you'll see it's only a very, very short clip. But when I was a candidate for Holy Orders, so I wasn't yet a deacon, I was still a seminarian, but I was now wearing the collar. This production company on behalf of the BBC contacted the college and asked whether they could film with some of the students, some of the seminarians, because they were making a documentary about the life, the person, I guess, of St. Peter. They'd made a previous one about St. Paul, which had been really, really good. And it was presented by David Suchet, who's most people will know, for playing Poirot, who is a convert to Christianity. And St. Paul and the letters of St. Paul were really important to him in that journey. So they made this really good documentary following really St. Paul's journeys, his apostolic journeys, in the modern day and walking, they called it, in the footsteps of St. Paul. And once they'd done that, it was such a good production that they wanted to do the same about St. Peter. So they wanted to film with us a little bit in Rome. So yeah, that's how it came about.
So I'm just literally going to go straight into the video now and show that clip from you with Poirot.
It was certainly a curious legend, but it also perhaps points to a simple truth, that Peter always stayed close to his Jewish religion. Of course, in the centuries that followed, he would be claimed by the newly emerging Christian church.
In this back street of Rome is a little piece of England that has been here for 650 years.
The Venerable English College is a Catholic seminary that prepares young Englishmen for the priesthood. It seemed a good place to talk to a future generation of priests about Peter and his significance to them.
So, this is the English College?
That's right, and the oldest English institution outside of England.
Say that again, the oldest
English institution outside of England. You've got to understand, in the year 1300, the Pope at the time, Boniface VIII, declared a holy year, inviting pilgrims to come from all over Northern Europe. And they came in their thousands, including Englishmen. And that coat of arms it was above the door here saying, "This is the English hospice.
And
you can stay here."
What was their pilgrimage at that point?
So coming to St. Peter's tomb. I mean, that was the
St.
point.
Peter's tomb.
Exactly. So the Pope at the time was trying to refocus European Christianity back onto Rome, and that was the very purpose of it. And that's the start of this now seminary as an institution.
Pilgrims to see the bones of Peter.
To come to the tomb of Peter.
So, Father Tom, that must have really been quite the experience.
Yeah, it was. I mean, one of the things was just the professionalism of the team that was doing it. You know, I mean, real experts in their field. What's funny about that clip, by the way, is that at the end of that little corridor where you saw me take David Suchet's coat, they were making out as though he'd come in off the street into that room. That's it's not true. The camera, the door from the street, is immediately to the left of where the cameraman was standing. But on the day, because it was kind of sunny, the contrast was too much for the camera, so we had to make believe that you came in through that room, which is kind of funny. But they were really great to see an expert cameraman and soundman at work like that, and the production crew, and David Suchet himself as well. You know, really interesting guy to spend time with. His own story of his own journey of faith is really beautiful, and to see him at work as an actor, if you like, was really interesting. He spent the whole day shooting, filming around the college, and it was really interesting to see how he could sort of turn on the energy when he was needed on camera.
Yeah.
And then relax back away from it afterwards. A real, for any aspiring actors out there, that was something that made a real impression on me. As I think you heard in the clip there, the college started life as a hospice, a hostel really for pilgrims. So welcoming people to the college and visitors to Rome is a big part of the tradition really of the college. So it was great to welcome this professional crew. What's very funny, I mean, slightly embarrassing really, I guess. I spent an entire afternoon filming with that team. We filmed in the garden of the college. We talked about St. Peter, walking through different corridors from the library, and I spent, I don't know, 4.5 hours, I think, in total filming with them. And that, I mean, I found that exhausting, doing one take after another, and in different areas, different topics. And I think that's why I found David Suchet's ability to turn on that energy so impressive. But when the final cut came, there was just that 30 seconds of me. That's all there was. For 4.5 hours of filming, it wasn't an enormous return.
So, also with being a famous BBC personality, you're also a big sports fan, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. I think I'm probably a much bigger sports fan than I am BBC personality, to be honest. But no, I mean, it's true. It's one of the great things, I think.
And what's your sport of choice?
Oh, I mean, particularly, to watch sport. I enjoy so many different things. Golf for the Ryder Cup, particularly. That's a big thing. Rugby union, I guess, would be my sport of choice. When I lived in Manchester, I had 3 or 4 seasons following Sale, which was a great thing. Particularly, they were at a time when they were really very, very successful. And then I mean other things as well. And as we're gonna talk about, American football is something I enjoy. So,
you mentioned it. You've said mass for the Super Bowl champions. That's quite incredible. How did that come about?
It was. It just fell in my lap. A friend of mine, a friend of my brother's particularly, had a contact who was looking for a priest to celebrate mass for a visiting American football team when they came to London. You might know that over the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years, they've been playing some of the NFL games at Wembley and now also at New White Hart Lane. Basically, this friend of ours contacted my brother, and who's also a massive sports fan and a big NFL fan, and said, Phil, would you be able to do it? And bless him, my brother couldn't. He had a clash. He had something he had to be doing with his bishop that particular weekend. But with great kindness and thoughtfulness, he said, could I offer it to Tom? And it turned out that the team that they wanted the priest to come and celebrate the Mass for were the Philadelphia Eagles, who are my team from, decades ago. Because, as an English NFL fan or a British NFL fan, you don't grow up with a team in the same way that you do with a football team, or, a local rugby club or something. You pick one. And Philadelphia have been my team for an awfully long time, so it was a real grace that this opportunity came up.
And we've got some evidence of that as well. You with a group of 4 people. Who's that with? The 4 people you're with?
So these are three of the coaches actually from the Philadelphia Eagles. Two of the coaches really. On the far left, as we're looking at it, that's Dave Phipp, who's the special teams coordinator for the Eagles, and then in the centre to my left in the photo is Jerry Stoutland, who's the Jeff Stoutland, I should say, who's the linesman coach, one of the best in the business. And then on our far right, Andy Vidal is the vice president of personnel. So he's like the chief scout, I guess. All of them, practicing Catholics. It's really interesting. The reason that they wanted a priest to come down to celebrate this Mass is that there's, particularly with baseball teams, but with football teams as well in America, they're on the road a lot during the season. So there's a real provision for Catholics and Christians of other denominations to make sure that there's a service, a Mass offered at the team hotel, because they play on a Sunday. So you'd offer a vigil Mass, and that was how the opportunity came about. It's true, by the way, of sportsmen in our own country as well. At St Joseph's in Sale, we used to have a couple of the Sale rugby players, the Fernandez Lobby brothers, used to come to Mass at St Joseph's. John O'Shea, the Man United player, when he was still at United, used to come to Mass at St Joseph's, and a lot of managers as well. Are big Catholics. Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to show one last picture, and the question I'm going to pose with this picture is, are they really big or are you really small?
Yeah,
because the picture with you between the two of them is incredible.
Yeah,
the difference in size.
This is we need to show the other one as well in a moment, Sandy, because that's the one where I'm wearing the Super Bowl ring. I'm not having it that we're not showing the one.
This
where
one
I'm
here.
The Super Bowl ring. These two. This is Lane Johnson and Brandon Brooks. They're they play on the offensive line, so yeah, they are the big guys of the team. Anyone who's seen the Sandra Bullock movie, The Blind Side, they play the position that Michael Orr in that movie plays. And you're right, I look like a hobbit. It's absolutely ridiculous. The answer to your question is I'm not very tall. But yeah, I just look like a hobbit, like a Lilliputian. The other one with the single guy, that's Nick Foles, who's since left the Eagles. He's now in Chicago. But that's a Super Bowl winning quarterback, a Super Bowl MVP. And they were so welcoming to me, even to the point of bringing the Super Bowl ring, their 2017 Super Bowl winners ring, and giving me a chance to wear that. So, it's always, truly, it's always a privilege to celebrate the Mass, to share the Mass with our people. But for me, as a sports fan and as an Eagles fan, that was a particular privilege.
really is something to write home about, isn't it? So, the standard set of questions at the end, you've completely blown them out of the water for me this week, because obviously we already know you drive a Fiesta, and we already know you met the Pope. So just two last questions before we finish.
Yeah.
First of all, where did you last go on holiday?
Llandudno. Somebody lent me and a priest mate of mine a house up in Llandudno for about 5 nights back in January. Just in that sort of post-Christmas period. And it was really nice. It was really, really nice. I like Llandudno a lot.
You managed to squeeze a holiday in just before lockdown. That was well done.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, that's true. Yeah, it was only a couple of months later.
And finally, Netflix. Are you a Netflix watcher? And if you are, what's your current watch?
I'm not, but I think things I've really enjoyed during this lockdown period. Like you say, I love cooking, and it's come to an end now. But the Great British Menu for a foodie was a brilliant series this year. Amazing cooking, just artists. So I watched a lot of that. And the other thing that I've really enjoyed, the National Theatre have been screening for free on YouTube a lot of their productions, like really high level theatre. And I've really enjoyed some of those. So those have been kind of cultural highlights for me during this time.
Yeah. Well, Father Tom, I just want to say a massive, massive thank you very much for joining us tonight. If you had a message for our young people, what would your message be?
Yeah, Sandy, I mean, I think obviously we're living through some very strange times at the moment. And for all of us, our expectations are shifting. Things we've relied on, relationships, people, we're distant from those things at the moment necessarily. And some of our plans are in tatters, the things we were expecting. I think that's been really hard for a lot of people. We're anxious at the moment. Many of us are grieving for people we've lost. And in the midst of all that, particularly these last couple of weeks, we've been living in a time of real social change, a moment, of social change. And there's been protests and righteous anger and also deplorable violence. So it's a tough time for us now, and a tough time particularly, I think, if we're young and we had plans. And I think it's at times like these we particularly need faith, and we recognize our need for living in hope, and we see in one another how much we need love and confidence and encouragement. So in the midst of all of that, the passage that really came to mind was the classic Christian definition of what faith is. So this is from the letter to the Hebrews, which is a beautiful book from Scripture that talks about the effect of Jesus, of his death, of his resurrection in our world. So it's well worth looking up. Letter to the Hebrews. And the letter says that faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the certainty of things unseen. The assurance of things hoped for, the certainty of things unseen. Now, I've spent this last 45, 50 minutes, talking to you, Sandy, about my life, about what God has done in my life. I've been telling a bit of that story. And as I say, I never expected to be a priest. This wasn't my plan. It wasn't what I was looking for. And if my story or the story of what God has done, is doing in my life means anything at all, it's that God has blessings for us, even in things that we might not have chosen, things that we didn't plan ourselves. And I think that's really important to hang on to. Blessings, not just for us, not just for me, but for others as well. God will make from these situations blessings if we can live in that relationship with him. I sometimes wonder, or worry really, that we fall in sometimes to thinking that our Christian faith is kind of like a a series of tick boxes. You know, you've got to believe this. You've got to, I don't know, go to mass on Sundays. There are these things that you do, these things that you don't do. Tick, 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 you're a Christian. Now, some of those things, in fact, most of them are important, but they're important because they support us in a relationship with God, or they're the fruit of a real relationship with God. A God who loves each of us personally. And in that relationship, what I've learned, I'm still learning really, but one of the things that I'm on my way to learning is that relationship is creative. You know, it's vital. It's literally life-giving, and it's not dependent on the moment we live in. You know, to live in God's love, to live in faith and hope, to have the confidence to offer ourselves in moments when we're needed, to have the generosity to work with others, to forgive. Pope Francis talks about an adventure of mercy. He asks us to make our lives an adventure of mercy. And that relationship with God, it puts life into a new context. It gives us a bigger horizon. And I just think, you know, we didn't choose to live at this time of challenge, but it is ours to live through in faith, to have a sense of the calling, to have an assurance of the confidence that we can give of ourselves, and we can have the strength and the positivity, not just from our own resources, but from what God wants to pour out to us, the blessings he wants to give us, the blessing that he wants to make each of us into for others as well. So, look, the world needs young people right now, young people who can see the bigger picture, who are prepared to give of themselves, who are going to be engaged and smart and generous and strong. And for me, you know, what my life has told me, despite my plans not turning out the way that I'd expected, that's found in God. God is the great context of our lives. And the closer we are to him, the deeper the relationship that we live with him, the more we're going to find what we truly want. He's going to expand our hopes, and he's going to pour out those blessings to us and to others.
Father Tom, thank you very much for that. And thank you very much for joining us this evening and for sharing some of your story with us.
The diocese's own David Letterman, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Now, we're going to swiftly move over to Birkenhead, from Shrewsbury to Birkenhead, where we're going to pray, as we do every week, with Father Chris.
Hello and welcome back to my study here in St. Joseph's in Birkenhead. As we begin our time of prayer together this evening, let's make the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Listening to the scriptures is always listening to the voice of God. So let's listen to an extract from the first letter of St. John. Think of the love that the Father has lavished on us by letting us be called God's children, and that is what we are. Because the world refused to acknowledge him, therefore it does not acknowledge us. My dear people, we're already the children of God, but what we are to be in the future has not yet been revealed. All we know is that when it is revealed, we shall be like him, because we shall see him as he really is. I was looking out of the presbytery window this morning, and I watched as a rather fat-looking pigeon waddled towards the edge of my neighbour's roof. Without hesitation, it sort of stepped off the roof edge and opened its wings. The wind must have caught that pigeon as it started to glide upwards with what looked like very little effort. I was a little amazed, to be honest, at the confidence of this fat bird. It somehow trusted that they wouldn't plummet to the ground. We too have to take that step, that jump into the unknown, that leap of faith. As St. John says in his letter, we don't know what the future holds, but we put our trust in the Lord that it will be good. When we do put our trust in the Lord Jesus, amazing things can and do happen. David Gatwood, in his book, Can We Talk, Lord?, has a prayer entitled, Lord, I've got a few questions. Lord, you got a minute? It's just that I've a few questions again. This week's been quite good, Lord, really. Not boring as I'd expected. Making friends, learning, talking, some good stuff. But there's this problem. I think I might be paranoid. But it seems to me that everyone else has more to offer than I do. Those with the rock-solid faith. The ones who know the Bible cover to cover. Those who don't mind saying what they think. And me. Well, exactly. Me. Come on, Lord, you must be crazy. I'm a clown. My faith has so many holes in it, you could use it as a sieve. I lose my temper, get angry if someone disagrees with me. To be honest, Lord, I think I find the Bible quite boring. So what can I offer? Maybe I'm not the only one who feels like the worst Christian in the world. Look at St. Peter. He was a hot-headed fisherman with a tendency to speak first and think later. He even denied you 3 times. Yet look what you did with him. But that's you, isn't it, Lord? You like ordinary people. You were a carpenter. Your disciples were fishermen, tax collectors, and now me. And for that, Lord, I thank you. Thank you for choosing me and for accepting me as I am. Amen. So let's pray together in the words Jesus taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. And so let's ask the Lord for his blessing. The Lord be with you. And may Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Go in peace, glorifying the Lord by your life. Thanks be to God.
And thank you to Father Chris for that, and to Father Tom for before. I'm going to start this little bit with an apology. I am sorry about the technicalities of tonight. I'm not really sure what you've heard, what you've not heard. If it's what I've heard of me, or it's not been the best, but we will try and get it ironed out by next week. But watch back for the YouTube video being released again. We will iron out all the little kinks and little bits and pieces for you to watch. And also Father Tom's little clip will be there as well. Next week, we've got a double act happening. So it's Father Peter from St. Maximilian Kolbe in Runcorn, and also Father Peter from St. Peter's in Hazel Grove. They'll both be with us next Wednesday in the Clergy Cafe, hopefully with no technical issues that we can report. But you never know. Every week seems to be a new week, and it might be next week that the computer goes out the window. We've certainly discovered tonight that the computer doesn't cope very well with the live stream. But thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for watching. Follow us on all of the social media platforms. Don't forget to subscribe to YouTube, and we will see you back here at the same time next week.